Welcome to the Way Podcast with your host, Bill Trofesky. Today, I will be sitting down with Ben Kitchings to talk about the Spanish flu and its relation or similarities to the COVID virus. Now, Ben Kitchings has a master's degree in history, and in addition to that, he routinely ranks in the top 100 for documentary podcasts. And you could go check him out at the History Voyager podcast, where season 1 has been primarily on the Spanish flu and COVID. So I think it makes him a very good candidate to come on the show to talk about that. Before we start, this is FM 91.7 WHUS Stores at the top of the hour. Check out the podcast at podcasttheway.com. And the views expressed in this program do not reflect the views of the staff, management, or licensee of this station. Now, let's get into it. Ben Kitchings, can you introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Hi, my name is Benjamin Kitchings. As he just said, I have a master's degree in history. I've been studying American political culture for many, many years at this point. I'm basically an expert in I don't want to say this too loudly, but I'm essentially an expert in the history of my hometown, Atlanta, Georgia. I've been studying that for the better part of 20 years. My mother's people actually walked into Northwest Georgia essentially from North Carolina in about 1810 or so. We're not really sure. My father's people are from a tiny town north of a place called Macon, Georgia, which you might have heard of. That's where, that's where the Allman Brothers are from, and that's where Otis Redding's from. Anyway, so I wanted to do a history podcast, and that's initially what I set out to do. And then COVID happened, and so now I've mainly focused on COVID. I am actually going to wrap up the Spanish flu podcast probably either this week or next. But I'm going to continue on podcasting. My next season is going to be about the Enlightenment, but I'm going to be dealing with COVID-19 pretty much until it's over, I guess.
Sounds good. I know everybody's probably sick of hearing the COVID by this point, but I know the Spanish flu has come up in articles a lot recently. I want to make sure we bring out the right information to it, and it's still very interesting in itself. Now, to start, what's the Spanish flu or H1N1?
Okay, so I'm glad you brought that up, Bill. I really am. All right, so okay, here's the deal. So today, modern virologists don't really think H1N1, that is the H1N1 that you and I can go get now, or that we could have gotten in the past, the recent past, was actually the Spanish flu. Okay. The reality of the situation was the Spanish flu existed from approximately 1900 to around the 1920s, or 1927 is the latest day as far as antibodies in the bloodstream of Americans. They believe that the Spanish flu came out of Kansas. Okay. Now, that's interesting because it's one of the only viruses in the world that didn't come out of a place in China. There's an actual, like a plane in China where most of your viruses actually come out of.
Is that conspiracy like, or is it?
No, it's actual. That's a proven fact.
Oh, okay.
It's like there's a plane in China, not an airplane, mind you, like a geographic feature, like the Great Plains. There's a plane in China that has a lot of lakes on it. And the way a virus happens, right, is a waterborne or a water adjacent animal, usually a water bird, okay, contracts the virus, and the way we, that is humans, normally get it is it has to be passed on to a mammal that we eat. Okay, so take for example COVID. Okay. COVID-19 came out of this same sort of area in China that not the Spanish flu, but that say like the Black Death or somewhere like that came out of. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So essentially, what that was the wrong pig met the wrong bat. Okay,
Yeah.
so
On top of it, the guy undercooked the bat, right?
exactly.
Okay. You said it came out of Kansas and it started in the 1900 or like the year 1900 about.
They've detected. I'm sorry. They detected antibodies going as far back as 1900. There was a doctor who only recently came to light again. His name was Loring Milner. Loring Milner was writing Harvard Medical School because he was encountering uh, basically an illness that he could not solve. All right. Some of the initial letters that he wrote to Harvard are literally shocking. They're just horrifying to, and when you read his letters, when you read his letters, frankly, you become really aware very quickly. This is not the flu. Okay, I'll give you an example. So one of the ways to die of the Spanish flu was actually to stroke out. Okay, nobody
Mhm.
dies of a stroke with the flu. All right, with a you know what I'm saying, like H1N1. Nobody strokes out from the flu, right?
Okay.
Nobody coughs so hard that your blood vessels rupture from the flu. Okay?
It just doesn't happen.
Exactly. Exactly.
So what's the difference between the flu and influenza?
I'm glad you asked that. When you say the flu, are you saying like all flus everywhere or the Spanish flu?
I'd say the yearly flu we get, bird flu.
Even better. Okay, I'm glad you asked that. There is no difference. Uh, Influenza is an Italian word, which literally means influence from above, like from the gods. Okay.
Like
So,
God's bidding.
exactly. Exactly.
So again, all right. So you said antibodies were found back in the 1900s, and that
Well, from I mean,
1900 to like
from
1927.
exactly.
What? How come? According to my understanding, it became an epidemic in the year 1918. Correct? Why is that?
Well, and I'm glad you asked that. Okay. So, essentially, what you've got going on is okay, Kansas was a source of beef for the entire world at that point. So, what you had happening was that these cattle would carry the virus, or it could have been the people from a military camp. But Loring Milner was writing his letters starting in either 1915 or 1917, and that is simply because on the letters you can't really figure out is that a 7 or a 5. Okay, like when he wrote the date,
Yeah.
you can't really read that and tell me if that's a 7 or a 5. But essentially, so essentially, what's going on is that this, you had this industrial revolution, basically. Okay, and the powers that be hadn't really thought up, well, what are the other ramifications of an industrial revolution? Not only can you move people fast, but you can move viruses fast, right?
Yeah.
So it's important to understand that the Spanish flu was the first virus that traveled by steam, that traveled by mechanization. Every other virus traveled at a walking pace or a horse galloping pace or whatever. So you could have viruses that the virus gets there before the news gets there, right?
Yeah. And building off that, World War One took place during that time. Did that add on to it?
Oh, very much. In fact, when you really dig into it, um, when you really dig into it, you really it's really hard to tell. Like, did this person die of a gunshot wound, or did they die of the virus? In a lot of cases, not in every case.
They couldn't
But
tell. They couldn't see like a bullet hole versus.
well, they could, but did this person shoot themselves, or were they shot? Because remember, okay, all right, I'm going to tell you something, right?
Yeah.
You know more about COVID-19 than the doctor who was leading the U.S. government effort in the Spanish flu knew about the Spanish flu. Okay?
Yeah.
So people didn't really know how the Spanish flu was spread. People didn't know what the Spanish flu was. They didn't know what the flu was. There was a lot of thought all over the place that, here's something fascinating. Here's one of the parallels between COVID and the flu. Okay. So, they basically, like, doctors, I'm talking, would have thought, well, okay, black people can get the flu, but white people can't. Okay. Or they might have thought, okay, like in San Francisco, the San Francisco authorities were like, well, the Japanese and the Chinese, they don't get the flu. Like, they're immune to it. But the white people, they get it. Right?
Yeah, like
You see what I'm saying?
They thought it was still like a difference in biology.
They literally thought, now this is what's so fascinating. They literally thought that black people and white people and not just white people, I'm sorry, but like, so Travosky, what is that, if you don't mind my asking?
Oh, Polish.
Okay. So Polish people, they literally thought were different biological beings from German people. Okay. So, like, they would have thought that a Polish man and a German woman shouldn't have kids because something is wrong. Something would be wrong.
Really?
Genetic. Yes, sir.
Back in 1918.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Wow.
Yes, sir.
Briefly, what do you call the longest street in Poland?
I don't know.
Pulaski Circle.
Okay.
All right, but moving on. Well, can you tell me anything about the Red Summer?
I don't know. I don't know exactly what you're talking about with the Red Summer, but I'll tell you one thing that spread the Spanish flu in 1919 and 1918 like wildfire. Okay. One of the things that spread it was, and I want to bring this up, but I'm going to say this right here. So in 1918 and 1919, you had a phenomenon in America that was new. Okay. You had young men moving out from mom and dad and aunts and uncles for the first time in their lives. Okay. And going to the cities. And this was en masse. Okay. Everybody was doing this. And why is that important for the spread of the flu? Because they might not know how to clean their clothes properly. They might not know how to bathe. One of the things that I learned in studying the Spanish flu was how filthy regular people really used to be. Okay.
Yeah.
And there was a parade in Philadelphia. Okay. This parade spread the flu like crazy.
What kind of parade?
It was a war parade. It was a bond parade to raise money for the war effort, and it spread the flu like mad. And here's something I want to bring up, and I really need to bring this up if we're going to talk about the Spanish flu.
Yeah.
Nobody today, people don't know how many people died of the Spanish flu. It's important for me to say that. And that's why, as my podcast progresses, I'm going to get away from actual numbers because, frankly, look, here's something I learned. they would hide deaths. Okay, they would hide deaths officially all the time and constantly. And for example, no one knows how many black people died of the Spanish flu. Um, Nobody knows how many Jewish people in America died of the Spanish flu.
They left them
Uh,
out of the statistics.
well, because okay, right. So a black person in the South, or probably in the North, wouldn't really go to the doctor. Okay, so you see where that goes?
Yeah.
Like if you've got the flu and you don't, okay. So the way I sum it up about the Spanish flu is, the way to die of the Spanish flu, the main way to die, Bill, of the Spanish flu, is to drop dead next to a doctor who thought you could have died from the Spanish flu. Okay. So if you're just some Anglo Saxon Protestant, right, and you're from quote unquote a good family, okay, that doctor probably didn't think you could have died of the flu, right?
He thought
So
you were
you,
healthy. Too
well,
healthy for it.
no, they thought the flu was only going to kill poor people or people of a certain ethnicity.
Oh, okay.
Okay. But now they weren't thinking that, like they weren't thinking the same ethnicity everywhere. Like you might have a doctor in one town that thought, oh, well, German people, they die of the flu, right? So
Yeah.
if a German person, has a stroke or a seizure or a serious lung involvement, then they died of the flu.
Yeah, it's kind
But
of like what you mentioned earlier.
exactly.
Hmm.
Right on. Now you get it.
Yeah. And the fake statistics too. My previous podcast, I talked to somebody out in Russia, and he was telling me that, well, Putin absolutely is faking his death statistics. Where people like go in, they get sick, they die, and they don't count as COVID to help lower the stats. So that's kind of carrying over today, I'd say.
Oh,
But
it carries over here too.
in America too.
Well, let me talk a little bit about what. Okay, I call all over the country. I've talked to people all over the country um, for my podcast, and some of them have made the internet, and some of them haven't. And the thing that I hit on today was how many people I talk to that tell me they're missing people. Like people are missing. Like they don't turn up at work, or where did this person go, or things like that. And also, I have a friend who's a nurse, and she said that there was a magical moment where her hospital figured out that there were all these people dying of heart attacks, and they had come away from COVID, they thought successfully, but it turned out that the COVID was causing the preconditions for a heart attack. Well, so her state eventually had to come around to the idea that that heart attack might as well be a COVID death. Okay. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Before, I believe you told me something before about how it could clot your blood, the COVID.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I talked to a woman. This is so crazy. I talked to one woman specifically that for some reason this haunts me. Her husband is missing half of his left hand from COVID, and he can't even tie his shoes. And I talked to another fella. I actually know a man who COVID settled in his pancreas and killed his pancreas. And so now he has horrible diabetes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So those are some of those lasting sicknesses I've been hearing about.
Lasting sicknesses. Yes, sir. And also there's been COVID blindness. What else? Just essentially what happens is that you can have blood clots, and also COVID can essentially pick an organ and just sort of settle in it. And that's a problem.
I heard that A lot of younger people my age, think that we're immune to COVID, which, if you look death wise, we are. However, I've heard that we're more likely to suffer long term consequences from the COVID than an old person is to die from COVID.
Here's what I'm learning. And remember, I'm not a medical person, but I am somebody who's highly educated, and I've used that education to educate myself about COVID-19. Okay. All right. So let me just say that. Here's what I'm learning. What I'm learning is it's true enough. Okay. True enough. Most people are not going to die from their initial contact with COVID-19. Okay. That is true.
Regardless of age?
Um, no. Most people. Most
Okay.
people are not. If you're 65 and older, if you're 60 and older,
Oh, you mean in general? Okay.
okay. But most people are not going to die from the initial contact with COVID. But the worry isn't the death, okay? The worry is COVID will pick something. COVID will settle into an organ, or COVID will cause blood clots. And also, and this is something we need to remember, okay? Um, I have a friend who's a epidemiologist, and he likes to say this, that the problem with COVID is that nobody's grandmother died of COVID in 1990. So what he means by that is nobody knows how this goes. Okay, right? So nobody knows, if I get COVID now, what's my life going to be like in 5 or 10 years? Okay.
Don't know yet. We don't know the long term yet.
Exactly. That's my point.
All right. And on comparison, according to Mark Shies, I hope I'm saying that correct, but he's a infectious disease specialist in the University of Minnesota. What made the Spanish flu, or what makes it different than COVID, is that the Spanish flu actually would kill or target younger, healthy Americans. Is that right? Versus COVID, that seems to kill the older generation.
Okay. Here's the problem with I'm going to tell you and your listeners a pet peeve of mine, okay? Here's the problem with comparing COVID-19 to the Spanish flu, okay? Now, until very recently, people thought, I mean, everybody thought that that the Spanish flu started maybe in 1917, but, not any further back than that, okay? All right. Now we're learning, actually it was knocking around the Midwest in this country for years and years and years. Okay, before it bumped into two things. Before it bumped into Dr. Loring Milner, and before it bumped into Camp Funston in Kansas. All right. World War One, essentially. Okay. Okay. So the analogy here is, if we're not looking at COVID in 1915, right? What if it's really early in COVID, and like it's so early that we wouldn't have detected it 10 years ago, and now we do. Okay.
You're saying, as if, what if it's been around longer than?
No, I'm saying, what if this is not the peak? Right? What if this is before the peak of COVID? Do you see what I'm saying?
I don't want to relate it back to Spanish flu, because you just said it was a pet peeve. But the Spanish flu, the second wave, was the real deadly part. Are you saying that with COVID, like, what if the second wave is coming?
Exactly. Because we're not in the second wave yet. We're absolutely not.
I feel like we've just been in one continuous wave.
Well, I'll give you an example, okay? I'll give you an example. I live in a big city. I live outside of a big city in America, all right? Atlanta, Georgia is a a very large metropolis in America. Okay. Um, Schools are back in session. People go to the mall. People go shopping, and everybody. There's lots and lots of folks that don't even know that COVID can cause blood clots, and you know, get your arm can have to get amputated or whatever. Right? There's lots of people that don't know that. Okay. What happens when you take all these people that have been circulating around, okay, and you bring them back, okay? And if you're only looking for death, and if most people aren't going to die from it, you know, so you're not looking at like your liver failed or your kidney failed or whatever, right? You're looking for death.
Yeah, it doesn't look as bad versus double or even triple, or I don't know the stat, but
Well,
a lot
right,
more people getting,
right. And
like you mentioned.
exactly. And my worry is that it'll build slowly, like it'll dawn on people slowly. Oh, this is what's happening. Okay. Right. That's what
Yeah,
my worry is.
it's already been about 8 months, maybe 9, and people still.
I have a buddy who swears that he caught COVID in December. He swears to it. Now, I don't know if he did or not, but, you know, I don't have any reason to doubt him.
He could get a test. Oh wait, how long do antibodies stay in your system for? How long do you
I
have
think,
immunity for it?
well, 3 months. You have immunity for 3 months.
Okay, so he could get it again.
Exactly. And there is such a thing as you can have a disease and then get it worse later.
Really?
That is true. Yes.
Your body's not. It doesn't have any leftover antibodies, or was it the T cells don't recognize it?
Okay. We're getting way outside of my area of expertise here, but I have a friend. I have a really good friend who lives in. Essentially, he lives in a tropical country. Okay. And there's a whole lot of tropical diseases that you can get, right? That you get the disease, you get over it, and then if you get it again, you get it worse. There's a whole lot of those.
Okay, so it's very absolutely plausible.
It's possible. It's within the realm of possibility. So, yeah.
All right, bringing it back to the Spanish flu.
Okay.
You mentioned like the doctors were very uneducated. What kind of procedures did they or the government recommend to the public? I saw they'd wear masks too, or I heard they had similar restrictions, and a few follow-up questions I'll bring up. But what kind of action did they say, or what recommendations did they make?
There were a couple treatments that were tried. It's debatable. It's highly debatable as to whether or not the treatments actually worked. Which again goes back to, until very recently, people thought it actually was the flu. Like until very, very recently, people believed it was the flu.
It's named flu in the name, Spanish
Exactly.
flu. So I didn't even
Exactly. So wearing masks, and again, they told people to kind of stay away from each other, but then again, people were doing that anyway. Like the thing you have to understand is America was population wise was a much smaller country then, right? There were a lot more people living on farms, or they were farm adjacent. Basically, they might not live on a farm, but they were close to a farm or whatever, right? It's not like, I'll give you an example. The county I live in today has somewhere right around 1 million people. Okay. My county has somewhere real close to 1 million people. 30 years ago, it had less than half that. And I mean a lot less than half. Okay. So that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, if you follow it exponentially, 100 years ago, that could be I don't know math off the top of my head, but even 20%.
Well, I mean, in my county, I'll give you an example. In my county, uh, and I have a buddy actually that works in the transit authority in my city. In my county, um, it's really, really hard to find a building, a structure in this county that predates, say, 1940, right? I mean, you do have them, but it's hard to come by. It's not like you'll find like whole streets of that or whatever. You know, this was a rural place until about, I'd say, maybe the 80s for sure, the 1980s for
Okay,
sure.
the populations have changed, but do you do you know any recommendations the doctors would make, or what they'd say for the
Well,
people, or how they treat that these patients?
okay, and I'm glad you asked that. A lot of doctors, they would say like, wear a mask, um, wear a mask. Basically, what we today call socially distance. Um, Again, like I said, there were actual medicinal treatments that where it's debatable as to whether or not the treatment actually worked. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I saw biospace.com.
Okay.
I saw that medical professionals were recommending up to 30 grams of aspirin daily. And nowadays we know that doses above 4 grams are unsafe, and 30 grams are absolutely toxic. So I just like to say there's like an example of how we've definitely progressed medically. Now, okay, so, well, actually, just quickly to know too, why is it called the Spanish flu if it originated in Kansas?
Okay, and I'm glad you asked that. They didn't know that at the time. Number one. Number two, there's a lot of different, not a lot, but there's a few different stories of how it originated, how they came by the Spanish flu. Um, One is that Spain was neutral in the war, so they could be more honest and forthright. So that was one area or one thought. Another thought is that for the longest time, for actually most of the 20th century, uh, it was thought that the Spanish flu originated in France. Okay. And this town in France went out of its way to call it the Spanish flu so that people would think, well, that town doesn't have the flu in it. But my personal favorite, now this doesn't mean that this is the most likely, but it's my favorite. Okay. There was a clerk in the mailroom of an insurance company who named it the Spanish flu.
He just decided to name it that with
He just he just saw there was all this there was a flu, right? There was a flu. He was getting these claims from people with insurance, and he was like, "Oh my god," and somehow he landed on the name Spanish flu. Now we need to be clear here. I don't actually believe that, but I think it's a funny story.
yeah, that'd be an easy decision.
That's a funny story to me.
I like the World War I part.
Yeah.
It's not
I
as
mean,
funny,
one
but
thing that you need to understand, one of the things you need to understand about World War One, a lot of people, a whole lot of people during World War One actually thought the Germans had created it and that it was a weapon of war. I mean, that's what. And at one
yeah,
point,
but attacks yourself at that point.
well, at one point, even the president thought that. Even Woodrow Wilson thought it. So
Really? I heard two things. Well, one, I know today there's a lot of conspiracy theories. I've heard people saying Russia created it or China had like a fault that's broke out of.
are
But
you talking about coronavirus? Or are
yeah,
you
modern
talking
day
about?
corona, not Spanish flu.
Okay.
Um, but two, what I also heard that the government knew about, like, they caught on to Spanish flu back to Spanish flu time. They caught on to it. They kind of knew it was bad, but they really wanted to win the war, so they'd keep sending their soldiers out and keep letting them get infected so they could win the war.
That's actually true. That's not a conspiracy. That's real. There was a doctor in Boston. There was a okay. So this is one of the problems with the Spanish flu. Okay, so all of your, not all, but a lot of your death data from the Spanish flu is actually coming in America, is actually coming from military installations and civilians actually coming into military installations and being treated. Okay. So there was a doctor in Boston. He was a military, he was a Navy doctor in Boston. He actually figured out that okay, he called it a flu, but he would always put it in quotation marks, okay? And his main issue was he wanted to call it something that people would know, okay, well, this is, remember that most people weren't nearly as educated as they are today, okay? So he wanted to make it simple, right? And he was telling people, hey, there's a thing that's killing people, and he called it a flu. And what was your question? I'm sorry.
It's all good. It's about the government sending people off to during the war, just pushing them onward. It's because they want to win the war, knowing the risks. But
Yeah, that
also, I kind of like, so he called it the flu to just make it easier for us to know because we weren't as educated.
right. People weren't as educated then. Exactly.
And then the World War One part, I think you were gonna say something about that and the government pushing them onward.
That's right. Woodrow Wilson, for reasons that well, I guess I could sort of get into it, but Woodrow Wilson was a big believer that we needed to involve ourselves in European affairs. Okay. And I mean, Woodrow Wilson was a racist, and we throw that word around in 2020. But I'm here to tell you, Woodrow Wilson was just an amazing racist. He was he hated German. It wasn't even black people, right? He hated German people with a passion, with an absolute passion. He thought they were stupid. He thought they were basically unclean. Um, and he just thought he idolized the English population. Uh, he also essentially wanted to create or help to further or create an English based European empire. Essentially, that's not exactly the word he used, but I don't. Essentially, he wanted to wipe Germany off the map, basically.
Huh. Interesting. So that's why he kept pushing and going through it.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't just him. I mean, it wasn't just him. It was his generals. What was interesting was, and this really is, I mean, it makes sense, right? But the closer you actually were to the fighting, the more likely you would be to think, oh, this Spanish flu is terrible and we need to be, like it really kills people.
Because you'd see more of it because it's more dense.
You'd see more of it, and you'd also see, like, you'd really see what it really was. So, like, okay, to bring it back to COVID, right? So I hear from people a lot about how, there was a woman that told me that her husband lost half of his hand from COVID, right? So I hear these stories, but a lot of people don't. So they don't think it's a big deal, right? But I think it's a big deal. So it's like that. Like if you see people, if you literally watch people where their face, the blood vessels in their face rupture and they drown in their own blood internally, right? You're going to be like, oh, okay, this is stupid. We need to get away from it.
Yeah, but if you're in the comfort of your own home and you're just hearing, oh, it's bad.
Right on.
That's a big difference, to say the least. And building off of that, National Public Health and the University of Minnesota said that the National Public Health back during Spanish flu times would say things like, this is an ordinary influenza by another name, or you have nothing to fear if proper precautions are taken. So, would the government try to actually ease people's fears so it didn't sound as bad?
Okay, here's one of the biggest uh, similarities between the Spanish flu and COVID-19. Okay, um, so during 1918 and during the Spanish flu, there was no thought at all that the government was going to step in and do anything. I mean, the federal government, right? So everybody was on their own. Okay, so communities would want people to think, oh well, Spanish flu isn't here, right? Okay, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. They want to look better or clean or away from it.
And I mean, plus, like they did, there was no thought that the government was going to come in and save them. And I talked to a fellow today, and he said that one of the things that he thought his workplace was guilty of was essentially just thinking the federal government was going to step in and basically, essentially, do what they would have done anyway, which is not solve the problem, but at least provide, some kind of guidance or leadership or whatever.
Yeah, sounds like the government.
Right.
um, and I feel, well, back then they're more independent, like you'd say, in terms of the cities, is what I'm getting or understanding.
Well, not just cities, but states, communities, counties, you name it.
Okay. And this kind of relates to today too. But from the National Geographic, I read that St. Louis had low death rates, but then they lifted restrictions as a result, and then they skyrocketed. And cities back then that kept their interventions in place would not experience would experience low death rates and would fare much better. Many stories along that, like you mentioned Philadelphia earlier.
I've got a big story. San Francisco was nailed by the flu. Absolutely nailed by the Spanish flu. But the trick is, at the time, they were thought to have low death rates for a major city, that is. But when you go back and you look in modern day at the what was going on, right? The phone company, right? Basically, all the phone employees had caught the Spanish flu. So to the point where it was hard to make a phone call, hard to impossible. Uh, Garbage wasn't being picked up, okay? Because presumably the garbage people had Spanish flu. But then again, we don't know. Like, we don't actually know. It's just that there were so many deaths that were occurring during when we think the Spanish flu was happening that we have to go back and say, well, this had to have been the Spanish flu. Probably was the Spanish flu. But fires were endemic. Let's see, fires were endemic. Chinatown was, even though the Chinese people in San Francisco were hailed as people that were immune to the flu, Chinatown was basically empty. And there was also this weird. Okay, San Francisco was a town where, like, you would go there, but your family would be back east, right? Like, you would go, but your family would be back east. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you would write letters home, right? So people wrote letters home like, Susie, her boyfriend vanished. And come to think of it, my boyfriend vanished too. And come to think of it, and seriously, there would be these letters where this one lady would write, and it wasn't just one lady, but there was a lady that would write, all of my girlfriends their boyfriends just up and vanished all of a sudden, and so on. And there was also a horrifying incident. There was a baker. There was a female baker who I forget her name right now. Her boyfriend died suddenly, He dropped dead in some flour. All the people who ate that bread died. Okay. All the people who ate the bread that ate the bread from the flour that he fell in died. Now that's not the flu. Okay, I don't know what that is, but that's not the flu.
And they didn't put down the Spanish flu back then, or?
Well, like, what did I tell you earlier? The way to die of the Spanish flu, Bill, is to die near a doctor who thought you could have died from the Spanish flu.
All right.
Okay. You see what I'm saying?
I get that. I see that. I see that.
Okay. Okay. And I'll give you another example. A little closer to home for me. So up in the North Georgia mountains, there's a county up there that was nailed by the Spanish flu, but not officially, right? But all the families up there to this day, they say, well, my so-and-so died from the Spanish flu. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So,
if I got that right, they got hammered, but it wasn't reported, or I'm sorry.
It wasn't reported because this is the mountains, right? This is the Appalachian Mountains. So that they were really poor. So they didn't have a doctor to go to.
Got it. I know. Yeah, they didn't have the doctor. It's where they could die in the doctor room, like you said.
Exactly.
I'm sure you've seen the graph too, modern day COVID, where you see the death numbers, and I guess they don't line up with the yearly death. If you see a graph of the yearly deaths throughout the year, and then you see the spike we have this year compared to past years, the spike's pretty high, isn't it? Higher than what we're getting reported?
I haven't looked at that in a while, but it is. And there's got to be. I mean, there's got to be other things like people have talked about. Nurses and doctors I know have talked about how there's more heart attacks than there used to be. Things like that.
Yeah, where they don't directly, but it's very likely.
I mean, they'll tell me because I'm their friend, I think this is COVID, but you're not going to hear it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know.
No, I get it.
Like I have a friend. Okay, so back to my friend who's an epidemiologist. I have a friend who's an epidemiologist, and he says all the time, he says, well, I can tell you something because I'm your friend, right? But if I stand in front of a microphone and say it, right, it's another deal.
Okay.
Like that's a whole nother ball game, and I don't want to do that. Do you see what I'm saying?
I get it. Any chance you want to share that or what was possibly said?
One thing I will say is that I knew way before anybody else that air conditioning loves COVID. I mean, COVID loves air conditioning. And I will say, he actually got COVID-19 to live in a swimming pool. Okay. Now, lots and lots of doctors have said that COVID-19 doesn't live in a swimming. Excuse me.
All good.
Lots and lots of doctors have said that COVID-19 does not live in a swimming pool. But my friend said that it does.
The bleach doesn't kill it? Or not the bleach, the chlorine.
Well, like I said, the medical community is divided. So,
what do you say about the AC? You mentioned that, but then you moved to the pool.
So I knew back in, let me think, I knew way before other people that COVID loves air conditioning. COVID will live in an air conditioning unit. It'll spread that way.
Yeah, like somebody walking by will come through the window, or if you're in the room with somebody with COVID.
Central air. In the South, you can't exist in the South without central air.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
All right. Do you
yeah.
back to the Spanish flu? Do you know anything about the race riots that were going around in 1919?
Actually, yes and no. One of the great shocks from the Spanish flu was actually that, hang on, kids, what do you mean that I'm the same as these other people? Right? What? No. Why? That was a great shock to people.
Yeah. Okay. So they thought, okay. You mentioned some of that prior where people thought, oh, I can't get sick, or only you get sick, or you're immune, or.
Well, okay, so people say all the time that, you know, the Spanish flu didn't change anything. Well, it did. It changed that before the Spanish flu, like people would. So your people are Polish, okay? Well, my people are basically English. So back then, we would have thought, or we might have thought that you're a different biological being from me. Okay, so the Spanish flu was like, what? We're the same? No. Oh my God, let me have a riot.
Okay. And did that spread it more, make the virus spread worse?
Of course it did. And also, this is something I want to say. Now, early in my podcast, I lay out how many people died of the Spanish flu. But now, I don't know. They don't know how many people died from the Spanish flu. They just don't.
I saw a statistic. Like, I mean, I know you said there's different ones. I see 50 million killed Spanish flu and a third of the population infected. Would you say it's more, less, or you just don't know?
That 50, excuse me, that 50 million number is about as low as it could go. And I've seen it much, much higher than that.
What's some of the higher ones you've seen?
500 million. Well, okay, wait. 300 million died directly from it, and 200 million died because of it.
So a combination of 500 million, directly from it versus getting
Well, what would happen would be like, okay, so here's a classic case. So you're the man of the house, right? So you die of the flu. So your kids starve and your wife starves. Or here's another thing. You have a cough, all right, just a cough, and your community decides to kill you because you coughed. So you died because of the flu.
They'd kill people over fear of it?
It used to be illegal in this country, in different states, I think into the 1970s, but I'm not sure about that right this minute. It used to be illegal in this country, in a lot of places in this country, to cough in public. And that was because of the flu. Yes, sir.
You can't even control it. Like, even with the mask, or if you had to cough, you just run inside where other people are.
Well, I mean, I didn't say that the law had to be fair. I'm not saying I'm not saying I'm for the law. I'm just reporting, I think it's as dumb as you probably think it is. I'm just saying.
Okay, I get it. That wasn't directly at you. That's crazy.
No, well, right. And it's, I mean, and that's what history gets you is, one of the things I've learned about history is that I can think, and let's leave me out of it. One of the things I've learned about history is, like, you can think something, and then 30 years from now, oh no, that's what? Don't think that. That's not cool. That's not whatever. I'll give you an example. Think about Ace Ventura.
Oh yeah, the movie.
With Jim Carrey. You couldn't make that movie today.
Um, well, first, why? 'Cause I don't remember that movie.
The it was very. There was a key character in the movie that was a transvestite, and Jim Carrey was very. I think the word is in the movie anyway. The character Ace Ventura was very, very transphobic, so to say.
Okay.
What's another movie you couldn't make to?
I'll say, you know, The Office. The guy, what's the main guy's name? The famous
Michael Scott.
Yeah, he said there's no way that would pass in today's culture too.
I totally buy that. I totally believe it. You know, go back and look at The Office today. It's a movie about people that have a job. You know,
Yeah.
like look, it's a movie. You know, they like their job? No, but it's a job. You know?
No, I get it. I remember I've seen a few. I haven't seen too many, but I've seen a few episodes where they bring up some racial jokes, and that's what he was referring to, stuff like that.
Well, that and the fact that it's. Well, I'm trying to remember the show. The Sopranos. The Sopranos.
Yeah.
When you go back and watch The Sopranos again now, it's not as good. It's just not as good.
All right. All right. I want to bring it back to Spanish flu, COVID.
Sure thing.
So, Mark Twain once said, well, you don't like to make the relationship between the Spanish flu and COVID, you said. Mark Twain once. Oh, go ahead.
The reason why is a lot of people now, they make the relationship between Spanish flu and COVID as though, you know, we're at the peak of COVID. And I don't know that we're at the peak of COVID. That's why.
Okay. And makes sense. Hopefully we don't really get a peak, but we could.
Yeah. Mark Twain, you said.
Yeah, Mark Twain. He said, actually, wait, hold on. I'll bring that up in one sec because I just thought of something different that I want to get out first. So, vaccines, people are hoping that comes out before we get hit again. How long did it take for a Spanish flu vaccine to come out, or was that a player at all?
Let me tell you the scariest thing about the Spanish flu. That if I'd have done this podcast a year ago or 2 years ago, I would have just blazed right over it. I just wouldn't have even thought about it. Right? The Spanish flu went away. There was no vaccine. There was no treatment that worked. There was none of that. It literally just went away.
Why?
Sir, I'll be honest with you. Some of the best minds in this life work on that. Why did this go away? I'll tell you the God's honest. Every president from Gerald Ford all the way back to Woodrow Wilson had to deal with the Spanish flu. There was a program that the U.S. government had in case the Spanish flu resurfaced that was put in place by FDR. You know, it was terrifying. As far as a COVID vaccine, I heard that somebody said that they read somewhere that it could take 4 years. I know the one that's going to come out like in November. I'm not taking that.
No, you mean from like safety risks or like a Bill Gates conspiracy risk?
Oh no, I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all. I'm just not. You know, here's a brand new vaccine for a brand new disease we didn't even know existed a year ago.
Yeah, I've heard.
I'll wait. You know,
I get that. I've heard that usually it takes 4 to 5 years, like you mentioned, but because of a previous not disease going around, they were able to have that has a sharp contrast with this one. They were able to speed it up, or like they already had some research done on it.
I
That's my
hope that's right.
understanding.
Well, I hope that's right. I do. I hope that's right. I don't know.
Mm, I also do. I forgot which one it was. I wish I knew the name, but that's what I heard. Plus, they're combining stage 1 and 2 with Operation Warp Speed, stuff like that. Um, okay, so before Mark Twain, let me bring that back. So he said history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So Spanish flu versus COVID, what similarities or what rhymes have we seen?
Oh my God. The president, uh, this president thought or said out loud, whether he believed it or not, he thought that only black people could get it. Um, let me see. What else? What else? Jesus. Oh, there's so much. The fact that he literally refuses to use the system put in place by uh, George W. Bush that was perfected from Bill Clinton. The fact that uh, he fired the Obama's pandemic team. So essentially, it's every state for itself, is what I'm trying to say.
And that's
So that's a
similar
bit.
to the Spanish flu.
That's a big rhyme right there. That's a huge rhyme. Let's see what else. The fact that this is a moving target, right? Like you can have the best people in the world, and they can think one thing today, and then a month from. Okay, I'll give you an example. Do you, we're both old enough to remember when everybody said that kids couldn't get the coronavirus. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Now what they're saying is that actually the reason we thought that was because the kids, the children, right? They were socially distancing anyway because kids don't play outside and the kids were at home. And we're both also old enough to remember when coronavirus was only supposed to be a lung involvement. Okay. Right. You weren't supposed to die of a heart attack from corona.
I didn't even know that until recently.
Yeah. Yeah. What else? What else? What else? I mean, there's a lot. Um, God, there's so many similarities. I mean, the fact that it's probably going to take an international effort to get to a vaccine or something. Okay, here's a huge similarity right here. So the way that COVID-19, the way that Spanish flu spread was through the industrialization of the world. Okay, so you have these people that are running the world then that hadn't really thought about the implications of industrialization on the earth, okay, with society. So the same sort of thing with the global economy, okay? Like it turns out that Wuhan, China was the worst place that a virus could come from because so much stuff is made in Wuhan, China. Okay, so many people from the world, from the West, basically, go to Wuhan, China, and back. Okay, and this happens all the time. Also, the fact that just the racism. That's another big factor. But weirdly, Trump isn't as racist as Woodrow Wilson was. Right? Do you have?
Got it.
Yeah.
But what he's been saying or things of that nature is very similar to Woodrow Wilson.
Exactly. But what I mean is like Donald Trump doesn't think the Germans are filthy people, right? He, where Woodrow Wilson did.
Is directed in a different target.
Well, it's exactly sort of. Yes. Did you want to
put it simple?
Did you want to hear the differences? Because there are some differences too.
Oh yeah, that'd be better. Yeah. What are some differences?
We actually have the knowledge to defeat this virus. They didn't have the knowledge to defeat Spanish flu.
As in what like what steps to take to heal or how to better prepare yourself?
We have the labs, essentially the tools to defeat this virus. We have the infrastructure. We have the laws in place. We have everything we need to defeat this virus. We simply have a president who doesn't want to defeat the virus. And
I heard of. Oh, go ahead.
And I'm not saying that from a political standpoint. I'm saying it as a fact. For whatever reason you can possibly imagine, there's a law in this country. There is a law where he could direct the military to build hospitals. Okay, there's a law in this country where he could direct industry to basically, stop what you're doing, right? Stop whatever stupid thing you were doing before and build me whatever we need. Okay, there's a law that says that. And he was actually pressured into doing that, but through huge pressure. But there is a law where he could tell the army, go out and build hospitals for Americans. Right?
Yeah. And he did no such thing.
And he's not doing it. And not only that, but his party is trying to end insurance, which is going to end up, and I don't mean to get political here, but it's just a fact. If you end insurance in this country in certain rural areas or anywhere in particular, but rural areas specifically, you're going to end up closing hospitals, which is not what you need to do. Okay, it's not productive.
Yeah, haven't millions of people been thrown off their insurance too now?
Well, and this gets back to what I'm saying, right? So, okay, if you drop, okay, let me ask you a question, Bill. If you're sitting in there's an apartment, I don't know if I told you this, there's an apartment building 5 miles up the road from me, okay? In, let's call it February, but it could have been earlier than that, okay? Half of the apartment complex died from a heart attack. All right? They died from a heart attack within a 5-day period of each other. Does that sound like something that would normally happen?
The most minimal thing in the world.
It's pretty impossible. Okay, so that was say, call it February. I mean, the NBA was still going, right? That was February-ish, maybe. They didn't die of COVID officially, right?
Yeah, it kind of fits back into earlier where we don't know what the numbers are.
Exactly.
Stuff like that we get.
And here's another thing. And I've been chewing on this all day. And now I'm going to give it to you, and you're going to chew on it all day. So I talk to people all over the country for my podcast. Some of these make the internet, some of them don't. Right? I can't even tell you how many times I've heard, so-and-so is missing. So-and-so hadn't turned up to work in weeks. Well, I don't know where they are.
Yeah.
I can't even tell you. And it occurred to me today how many times I've heard that. Right? Because I had a guest on the show who didn't say that. Okay?
And it stood out for you.
It stood out because he didn't say it. And I thought, oh my God, did those people die of COVID? Depends. Basically.
It's kind of like what you said before with the Spanish flu, where they'd write letters or saying that girl's boyfriend went missing or the girlfriend went missing, stuff like that.
I actually interviewed a lady who said before the interview, she said half of the deli section at her store just disappeared.
Did they come back or just gone?
Well, And she said, this is what she said. She said they disappeared. And it's weird. She said, it's weird, Ben, because, you know, it's this is a terrible economy, Ben. You're not just going to walk off the job.
Yeah, you're gonna work while you can.
Right? I mean,
And this, I feel like a lot of people just need to keep working to keep making money. So they'll come in even with like some small symptoms, which could help keep it going, keep it spreading.
exactly right, sir.
And bring it politically again. It's been a few weeks, but we make, I want to say it was like 22% of the global deaths. And action, some people say, could be mandated quarantines or mandated laws or restrictions for states like Texas or Florida back when they had their peak. Was anything done like that during the Spanish flu?
Yes and no. Yes and no. People basically not at the federal level, but at the county level or the city level or the state level. Usually not at the state level, but at the county or city level. There'd be things like that. Also, remember that, okay, what are we worried about? We're worried about movie theaters. We're worried about, football where I live. College football is a big deal.
We had a high school football
so-
protest in Connecticut because they want to play.
Bless oy. Bless their hearts. I don't know. At this point, I don't know what to tell you. Except to say that you're not on the. I'll say this. If you heard the people that I heard every single day, you'd sit home if you could. Like if you possibly could. If you heard the people I hear every day, you wouldn't want to go out. Okay? I'm just saying.
That's why I'm glad we're having this podcast here. It's kind of like what you said before during World War I, where the soldiers would see people really getting sick or even just war in general. And they're like, hey, look how bad it is. But then somebody who's home and who's reading about a soccer game or something, they have no idea. They don't see it as anything severe. They don't see it as anything to stress out about because they don't see it.
My mother's mother, my mother's mother was a nurse. And my mother's father sold medical equipment. And they were not aware of the Spanish flu in Georgia.
All right. Hopefully I don't know, guess I'm on track. All right. So we touched about a lot of things. Is there any big summary you want to bring out to end this podcast?
Yeah, actually I do. Like I said, I talk to people all over the country. The thing that I hear over and over and over again is how scared people are. And you hear it, not so much they don't say it, but the way they say it. And like I hear stories that some of the stories are horrifying, literally horrifying. Not just financially, but actually like movie theater horrifying. Like some of these, like the slow realization that a lot of your friends are dying. I would say to just be careful, and if it's humanly possible for you to stay home or to seriously curtail your so-called fun things, I would totally do that if I were you, and I understand there's businesses and all like that, but I understand that. I get it. But with respect, you're not on these phone calls with me hearing people talk about their organs or their hands or their legs or their feet. God, it's crazy.
I wonder what the people in hospitals, the Medicare medical professionals are seeing.
I've noticed there's days I just cry. literally, there's times I just cry because it's just so much craziness that I see or that I hear because these people call me. And the thing I would say to people, and I just said it, but the thing I would say is, for God's sake, if you can stay home, do so. Please, please do so. I've studied the Spanish flu now for a while, and I'm here to tell you that I really believe that every single one of us is here because somebody somewhere down your family tree decided to sit at home. I'm here to tell you. So,
Keep the family tree going.
pretty much.
All right. Well, good way to end it, though.
That was a downer. I'm sorry.
No, 100. It's a downer
Yeah.
thing. It's a real. People need to hear it. It's a real thing. Like, that's the best. I can't
For
emphasize that anymore.
For real. Okay.
All right,
Yeah.
everybody. This has been the Way Podcast. Be sure to check out the History Voyager podcast with Ben Kitchings as he goes into season 2, The Enlightenment. This is FM 91.7 WHUS stores at the top of the hour. Again, podcasttheway.com. And yeah, thanks for coming out, Ben.
You're welcome.
All right. And as always, deuces.